What are the essential principles of a liberal first world state? What are the basic realities of modern liberal states with developed economies? What do we embrace, and what have we forgotten? Let's start from the beginning. The state is a necessary and manifest reality. If you don't have a state, someone else will. If that state doesn't respect private property in the market, then that state will be outcompeted economically by other states. This is also a manifest reality. The oligopolistic actors that may reduce the competitiveness of the market nonetheless find their genesis in it. And indeed, despite boom and bust, the long-term success of capitalism speaks for itself, both domestically and in the form of free trade across borders. Free markets are also correspondingly benefited by free culture, and in turn more people are included in both the production of goods and their consumption. All of this is upheld by classical liberal principles. However, within the market certain sectors become most effective at a large scale, and the logic of the market alone has no time for the poor and propertyless. Then it is incumbent upon the state to create a safety net commensurate with the populace of destitute. Though once long ago this would not be so, today this is also a manifest reality, as we observe around us in the welfare states of the developed world. Rather, states would be overthrown in revolutions if they did not provide such a thing. Long gone is the self-sufficient populace of yore. The final reality is that a state which takes care of its citizens also paves the way for the free riding that could bankrupt the state. The state can also misstep, and instead of merely providing a safety net, see the problem in the market mechanism itself, leading to deliberalization and decline. States bearing the cost of providing social programs may begin to regulate the lifestyles of their subjects. Universal healthcare, a most successful project of the social state, provides the impetus to control what people eat and what they are allowed to do. No matter what the magician-politician promises, costs cannot be simply swept away, only shifted through sleight of hand. The blade is particularly double-edged here, but necessary and even inevitable nonetheless. A state which opens the gates to free riding, as modern states must, provides an enormous incentive to those from less developed parts of the world to flood in across the borders, to not only bankrupt the state, but more to the point, to bring with them violent cultural aspirations and ideologies. Within the sphere of the state sits the liberalised market goose that lays the golden egg of social welfare and cultural freedom that must be protected from foxes within and without. Who can protect it? A dictator? No, because all social forces need pressure release valves. A dictatorial system leaves only one option open to its opponents: revolution. What then? Instead of violent competition, a populace, only if it understands and accepts such a truce, may engage in peaceful competition, each party willing to step aside magnanimously in defeat. This is democracy. It is not a good thing in of itself, but a necessary pressure release valve. The stability triangle of the modern state could still yet be thrown away by the mob. So that is why we have representative democracy, preferably yet with a written constitution, as in the USA, not too easy to throw away without drawing attention to what you're doing. All of this can be formalized firstly, like so. 1. Since Hobbes was right, sort of. As I said before, you need a state, or you are either dead or part of some small-scale band engaged in constant violence to survive. And then the subcomponents of that are A. Since private property allows costs to be internalised and economic calculation to be efficient, to avoid a violent revolution, you need a, relatively within the bounds of the state, competitive and open market to generate great wealth, specifically a market with many competing sellers and low state interference beyond that which protects property rights and levies taxes. And A2, you also benefit from liberal attitudes towards minorities that are within the nation-state, including women in the workforce as increased productivity, so liberal markets benefit from liberal culture. But B. Since certain markets have high natural barriers to entry, and at the areas beyond the limits of A, there are also natural monopolies, since not everything can be internalised, you need to firstly make sure that, and this is important in order to not too egregiously defy Section A, in cases that threaten large-scale impoverishment to death only, if the market doesn't break up the inefficient monopolies that develop and prevent price competition, the state is able to act decisively without itself engaging in monopolization through nationalisation. Secondly, regulate the ones that you can't break up due to their natural monopoly status. And finally, importantly for us dreamers, use technological means to lower the cost economies of scale of industry over time, so the need for Section B to be provided by the state can be gradually reduced. Techno-decentralism, techno-distributism, techno-libertarianism, blah. And B2. Since wealth is distributed unevenly to the point of impoverishment in some cases, in order to prevent a violent revolution, you need a welfare system commensurate with the populace of people genuinely unable to assure their own subsistence via the market, which would be everyone under a situation requiring basic income. But there's also Section C. Firstly, since welfare incentivizes free riding, lowering productivity, in the past it was necessary to develop a system of means testing, twinned with a culture of shame associated with welfare that ensured that only those who really desperately needed welfare used it. But since the level of people who genuinely need welfare has changed over time, while recognizing this, we now need to reduce those barriers and that culture over time in proportion to how many people actually need it, so as to prepare for a future automated economy. And C2. Since the incentive passes over borders, invoking migration of people with incompatible cultures, in order to prevent a violent revolution, you need strong border controls, proportional to the amount of migrants expected and how incompatible they are. The capacity to be selective must be maintained. If the boundaries of a state's authority are ill-defined, then the authority of that state itself is threatened. Liberal attitudes in the cultural realm will not be able to be maintained in the face of fundamentally hostile cultures. Today, this is the most important component of Section C, and the neglected component. Finally, we can end with Section 2. Since Hobbes was wrong, to avoid a violent revolution, you need to have a system that is democratic enough to act as a pressure valve, but dictatorial, constitutional, representative enough to make sure that any of the A, B and C components of one, that is the liberal triad within the state, aren't voted away by that very same democracy. Now we can reduce these principles down to ideological frames. We can collapse 1A into the ideology of classical liberalism, which, when fully expressed, upholds both the liberal market and liberal culture. 1B is represented by social liberalism, which is appropriate to apply at the margins of classical liberalism to cover for those without marketable value. The issues raised in 1C are most applicable to our era in subsection C2, the issue of incentivized migration waves. States must retain the ability to be selective, and this can be expressed in the ideology of national liberalism. Reformat the whole thing into ideological terms and we can produce a liberal prosperity triangle, protected by the state, which in turn alleviates its inner pressures through democracy. And so, 1. You need a state. A. You need classical liberal principles in market and culture. B. Moderated at their margins with social liberalism in the form of programs. And C. Protected by national liberalism at the borders. And 2. The state should balance democracy and rights through a representative system, preferably in the form of an explicit constitutional republic, as in the United States. Instead of one form of liberalism supplanting another, all three forms of liberalism must be meshed and applied appropriately at the margins of failure of the other. This is triangulated liberalism, or the liberal triad. Each beneficial characteristic calls up disadvantages which must be countered, and then the counter systems themselves yield their own disadvantages. Therefore, modern Western liberal prosperity is a fragile utopia.